My name is John Foltz, Director of User Interfaces at Wolfram Research. I'm giving a talk on report generation, maybe a slightly irreverent talk that goes into a little bit of the history of how we do stuff and some new functionality that we're very proud of and shipping as part of version 10 of the Wolfram system. Good morning. So let's talk about report generation, which is a new feature that we've added to version 10. So as I was saying, let's talk about string form. String form is something that's been around in Mathematica since, I think, all the way since the beginning, certainly for a very long time, as long as I've been with the company, which has been a very long time. And you've seen this sort of thing before. It's, we have slots that can be filled in. They're annotated with these backtick things. We can pluck them out in sequence. Or we can number them in some way. And so these first three are in sequence, and I've gone back and referred to them positionally again. And so here I have just a couple uses of string form. You see this kind of thing in messages all the time. You might have used it elsewhere, or you might not have used it elsewhere. It's useful for messages, but the utility is kind of limiting for certain other applications. There are some problems. So one of the big problems is that, well, it's called string form. It's one of these weird form things. It's not actually a string. So we're looking at the input form here. So what we got was a format. It's not, maybe what we wanted was really a string, and we wanted to take advantage of that substitution mechanism that it was using, but we couldn't do that. So it's back to string join for us. We could wrap toString around it, of course, but then that's that much extra work we have to add to every place that we use code. But there are more problems too. Maybe we don't want just a static string. Maybe we want some part of the string to be programmatic, so that we could figure out things like this. R.A. avocado. Wouldn't it be better if we could somehow have done this programmatically? That's what we have a language for, right? And certainly, yes, we do it using tricks with string join and all that sort of thing. It's painful, and I left this in a bad state. So we might want to name things too. Well, okay, I made a function here, and I have name slots and I put them in, but they're not named up here. Once again, we have a language. We'd like to be able to do this thing. I mean, good grief, Bourne Shell can do that, and yet we can't do it? That's just silly. And the results are confined to be string-like. We don't have anything that can assemble, maybe we want something that's kind of, it works kind of like string form, but assembles things in rows instead of strings. So string form is holding us back. And if we're going to fix string form, we should look at some of the new functionality in version 10. So version 10 has this very nice notion of template objects. And here are some of the specific template objects that you see in version 10. And this first one here is the one that I'm going to focus on, is string templates, which you can think of as being the real replacement for string form. But keep in mind, when we're talking about string templates, we also have file template, kind of like string, but it works with files, XML template, and notebook template. You might kind of get an idea of where those things are going. So let's look at how templates work. Well, this looks pretty familiar. This is the exact same thing we were using before. We have our slots, which are picked up in sequence. We have our positional notation. But what it emits, and I you might not normally want to see the result of this, but I left the semicolon off on purpose so we could see what it looks like. So string template evaluates into this template object. And this is, a very rich, structured sort of thing, taking advantage of the symbolic representation in Mathematica in order to be able to do the sort of thing that we want to do. And now we have this new function called template apply. It works with template objects. And there is, the same thing that string form did. But it's not the same thing that string form did because this gave us an actual string. So finally, 25 years later, we've done what Bourne Shell can do. So now we assembled this string template thing, but template apply also, and I think I use this in some of the future evaluations. Template apply also, just if you, excuse me, if you hand it a string as the first argument, it will just assume that's going to be a string template. So here we go. Same thing, just a shortcut. Well, so one of our other criticisms was that we couldn't embed a program. So here's a program, very tiny little function that just determines whether which article should we use. Should we use an A or should we use an and? And now we're going to reference that program in our template. And so we have a syntax here for doing that. And that syntax uses the angle bracket star notation. And so anything inside of angle bracket star is interpreted as a Mathematica expression, except, look at this, except we can actually take one of our arguments and then pass it in. So what I'm doing is I'm taking argument 2 right there, and in fact, once again, I think that I need to fix that up. There we go. So I'm taking argument 2 right there, passing it into the article function, and we'll see what comes out. So, and if we take a look at the output to this, we see that we have this template expression thing that lives in there. That's fine. We don't need to see the results, but just so you know that there's lots of stuff going on behind the scenes. And so now here are a couple of examples that show that indeed we have something that resolved correctly. Where we expected an and, we got an and. Where we expected an A, we got an A. So good for us. So it would be nice to be able to identify our elements using things other than positional notation. That would bring us right into the 90s for programming languages as well. So, so let's actually refer to them by name. So what do these names mean? And so this is the same thing as before. It's calling our little function here. But we've just replaced the backtick or the backtick number backtick with a name. And what do these names mean? These names are then, let me just reevaluate that. These names are names that are going to be plucked out of associations. And so here I'm just, by the way, this is a template object you don't actually have to use template apply. You can actually evaluate it as a function as well. All of these things are kind of interchangeable. And so that's what I'm going to do here is I have an association which defines a key for singular noun, a key for adjective, and a key for plural noun, not at all in the same sequence that they're used here. But everything works out fine. So, good. We're starting to make some progress now. We've been working a lot with strings. Maybe we want to do stuff other than strings. Maybe we want to have richer sorts of expressions here. So a string template by default is going to coerce everything into a string. But these are things that you can easily overcome. There are two relevant options here. The combiner function option basically says, okay, we have these pieces that that we're putting together. How do we put them together? The default would be string join, of course. But in this case, I don't want to, for this particular example, I don't want to represent everything as a string. I want to represent everything as a row. It's also the case that there is this insertion function option. This insertion function option this is the thing that makes sure to coerce your your arguments into strings if they're not strings already. So in this case, I'm basically disabling the insertion function by setting it to identity. So here's my template, and here is my richer typeset result. And now I have something which looks like the result of a template just fine, but now I get live mouse overs. So that's all well and good, but I think you came to a talk titled Report Generation, and I kept talking about string form and templates, and I kept throwing Mad Libs at you. That's the last Mad Lib. Don't worry about that. So let's start the talk over again. My name is John Fultz. I'm here to talk about report generation. Of course, you may have leapt ahead of me a bit and realized we actually have been talking about the technologies that lead into report generation. So we looked at the string templates, but there's also a notebook template. Template apply works on notebooks, and all of the principles that we just learned, including names, slots, embedding of programs, that sort of thing, this all works for notebooks as well. So let's take a look. Okay. So, and here, let me bail out of full screen. And so, how do you get a template that you start working with? So, we've added new option under the File, New Menu, Template Notebook. And you open it, and you get this thing with the toolbar. And now you can just start authoring. And just because I don't want to fool with setting up paths and such, I'm just going to point to one that I've already started, but it doesn't, all I did here, aside from doing the new template notebook, was just to add a couple things here and save it to a file. This was just stuff I typed in, nothing special. So let's add some stuff to it. So we said we could do slots. Better, we said we could do name slots. Let's do that. So here's, I have this button at the top, which allows me to insert a slot. And actually, it allows me to insert either a named or a positional slot. I'm going to be working with name slots for now. And it produces a little interface here. And I'm going to name my slot. We're just going to call it name. Press the OK. And now I have something which represents a name slot. I can go back into it and edit it if I want. I can even give it a default value. And by the way, these values are in their mathematical expressions. So, if I want to put in a default value, George. Okay. We said we could insert programs too. Let's insert a simple one. Okay, now I have a zone where I can type in a program. Nothing fancy, let's just put that in there. And I had one more slot that I wanted to put in, and let me see what the content, yes. Okay, so we're gonna create another name slot here, and we're gonna call that guy content, and we're done. We just created a report. Let's test it out. So there's a generate button here. Now, pressing this generate button is going to produce something which, well, it's got our dates. It's got George here. It doesn't have any content. Because we haven't given it any parameters yet, that generate button, that's just a way to test things. And if you've set up your notebook with default values, it's kind of a useful way to experiment with it and try it out. But let's actually, here's our association with the name and content fields defined. And just like before, we can do template apply. Template apply works on notebook objects. Notebook open returns a notebook object. So, and that runs, and there we go. We've got our content, and it's not just string based. It's got rich content in there. It ran our program. It's 4 in the morning where I'm from. So I haven't changed the time on my computer. So it's not busted. And generated by, with the correct name substituted in. And that is really all there was to it. It's very simple. It was just the stuff that I typed in and adding these slots and expressions and such. Let's do something a little, well, I should also point out, I mentioned template apply here because template apply, I want to show how the system is consistent, but actually we have another syntax. Rather than passing a notebook object to template apply, we just do generate document with the path there. So, and that would be the same thing 60 seconds later, of course. Okay, so let's take a look at a slightly more sophisticated example. Okay, now this one I already put together largely because it would have taken too much time to kind of assemble it here. But let's take a look at a few of the details. So I have Mathematica input here, and the Mathematica input references a template slot. That's okay. And it's going to evaluate. It may be difficult to see on the screen. There is a little bit of iconography there. And where that comes from is I chose the cell behavior here. And probably the most useful one is evaluate and delete. So what that does is it will evaluate the contents of the cell. And then if the cell produces output, it will leave the output, but it will delete the input. And there are other options here as well. Okay, so I'm setting something to a global variable, and then from this template, and then I'm looping over that template. And what is that about? That is this repeating block thing. And so what I've done is I've given a template variable whose value will be the repetition list. And what is a repetition list? It just means it's going to run over that, in this cell group over and over and over again for each of the values in currency list. Okay. And so then I'm going to do, I have a positional argument here, and the reason I'm using a positional argument is because that is a reference to the iterator that's being passed in. So every place where you see a 1, that's a reference to the iterator. And I'm running my report here. My report is going to be basically a list of currency exchange rates. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like. So my currency list is, I have 5 currencies here. The report was generated by me. So let's go ahead and do that. This takes a little bit to run because it's going out to the web to fetch the currency rates. And we'll see, there we go. Okay, so here we have ourselves a report, or actually, a series of pages for a report, which give exchange rates for the euro, exchange rates for the dollar, basically all of the possible permutations of the currencies that we passed in our association. Well, I'll bet we can do even a little better than that. I mean, after all, this is it's supposed to act like a notebook, right? So let's actually test the limits of that. So let's bring up the slideshow palette, and we are going to insert a slide break right there, and we're going to join it into the same cell group. He did say that it would repeat everything in the cell group, didn't he? Yes, he did. So let's group that in. Okay. And now let's format the notebook as a slideshow. Now the slideshow toolbar and the, we're looking at the raw template here. The result in the raw template leaves a little to be desired, but let's go ahead and rerun that generate document. And we drum our fingers waiting for the results, just in case there was a crash in one of the currencies we're about to find in the last few minutes. We're about to find out. And here we have a slideshow. And now I can go and look at each of the exchanges in a proper slideshow. I didn't do anything in the notebook that I wouldn't have normally done in a notebook. Nothing up my sleeve, so to speak. That's what I have to show.